lost any teeth because of this yet. But this is something that we do all the time, right? Like we don't get the help that we need because we're maybe afraid of the helper, or we're afraid of the help. We think that whatever it would take to get us to where we really need to be would be worse than the suffering that we're experiencing in the moment, right? And when we do this, when we avoid getting help because we're afraid of going to the source of help, we end up being stuck, or we end up being stalled. We end up being in exactly the same place we don't want to be because we're unwilling or unable to go to the source of help. Now, this is easy to apply to our spiritual lives, and our spiritual lives are really all of our lives. They're the foundation. They play out in every part of our lives. It's easy for us to do this same thing with God, but it's completely unnecessary. And this morning we're going to look at a story from the Old Testament about King David, and we're going to end by reading a song that David wrote, the lyrics to a song that David wrote when he was at his very lowest, when he was at his very worst, because this song tells us so much about the nature of God and gives us so much wisdom for how to deal with our own failings and shortcomings. So to understand what's going on here, we need to know a little bit about King David. So King David was known, eventually his reputation in Israel and Judah was that he was like the greatest king that they had ever had. He was like their Abraham Lincoln. But he wasn't destined to be this from the very beginning. It's not like he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. David was born into kind of obscurity. He wasn't the oldest in his family. He wasn't the biggest in his family. His family wasn't particularly prominent. And yet, out of this obscurity, God chose David and said to him, "You are going to be the ruler for my beloved people." Now, that did not mean that David's path to ultimately getting to that role that God had promised him was easy. That path was difficult, and it had betrayal, and it had loss, and it had his heart being broken over broken relationships and what it took to get to that point. But when we pick up the story, where we're going to pick up the story today, David is in a really good place. It has not been an easy path to get there, but at this point, David basically has everything he could possibly want, and he's aware of it. He has the kingdom, the kingdom of Israel and Judah. It's been united, and David is undisputably the beloved leader of this kingdom. His kingdom has military strength, so even though there are enemies around, the kingdom is strong and relatively secure. David has a family. He has really more family than he should have, and this is part of what gets David into trouble, but David has a family that's been given to